There are lives that move through rooms like a soft light that nobody notices, not because the light is weak, but because everything else is louder. To feel invisible is not merely to be unseen. It is to be misread by the world that should know you best. It is the slow erosion of recognition, the small gestures ignored, the questions unanswered, the presence that receives polite looks rather than true regard. For some, that experience begins in childhood. For others, it is layered across relationships and roles until the self learns to shrink to fit the shapes the world offers. This video is a quiet exploration of that shrinking, how it begins, how it settles into the bones, and, most importantly, how one might find the courage to take up space again. Listen as if the voice were a hand in the dark, steady, deliberate, and patient. Allow the images to breathe around the words. You are invited to look, slowly, at what it means to be present yet unseen. Most stories of invisibility do not begin with cruelty. More often they begin with neglect that masquerades as normalcy. Parents, distracted by their own burdens, caregivers who are present in body but not in attention, societies that prize loudness over stillness. A child learns early what behavior gathers notice and what behavior retreats into noise. When a child's needs are consistently deprioritized, they learn to make themselves small, to make fewer demands, to become the background against which others perform. This is not a moral indictment. It is an observation about adaptation. The child who withdraws often does so as a strategy for survival. The survival is effective. The child learns to soothe themselves, to anticipate moods, to become pliant. But survival begets cost. When recognition is absent, the child's inner narrative often rewrites itself. "I am not worth being seen," the mind whispers, and that whisper, repeated, becomes a doctrine. Healthy relationships hold a mirror. They reflect back our expressions, affirm our presence, and return our attempts at connection. Mirrorless relationships, those in which the other refuses or cannot reflect us, are corrosive. They teach us that our gestures do not land, that our words evaporate. Love becomes an uneven exchange. Attachment is unreciprocated. The person who reaches first learns that reaching does not change the other. When a lifetime of such relationships accumulates, the adult who felt invisible as a child begins to expect the same pattern everywhere, in friendships, in romantic love, in professional life. They show up, they give, they iterate, and the world carries on. Over time, they may master the art of giving so well that they forget how to receive. The tragedy is subtle. The interior life becomes busy with care for others, while the self at the center grows thin from lack of reflection. Invisibility leaves marks that are not merely emotional, they are somatic. The body keeps score of neglect and misrecognition. Muscle tension, chronic fatigue, inexplicable stomach tightness, a low-level anxiety that seems permanently knotted into the chest. These are the notes by which the body remembers being unseen. The nervous system learns to anticipate withdrawal rather than response. Physiological readiness becomes the default. This is not metaphorical language. Decades of relational neglect shape stress responses. The invisible adult may carry a vigilance that looks like hyper-responsibility externally, but feels like exhaustion internally. It is vital to listen to the body's grammar, not as an enemy, but as a map. In that map, the first stops on the journey back to visibility often include learning how to inhabit the body with more presence, how to register safety signals, and how to tolerate being noticed without immediately deflecting. People who feel invisible often tell themselves a story to make sense of the silence. They craft identities that are small and safe: the good helper, the quiet one, the undemanding partner. These identities can be adaptive, but they also constrict. Inside those narratives sits a quieter voice, the voice of authentic preference, of curiosity, of need, that was trained not to speak. Recovery requires a reauthoring of that inner story. It is an act of gentleness and audacity to say, "I matter," to claim a taste, a boundary, a desire. It is not dramatic rebellion. It is the steady daily practice of small assertions that teach the inner self how to be visible. Over time, the repertoire of the self expands and the inner silence loosens its grip. When visibility is denied, people adopt strategies that feel effective. Some become invisible servants, caretakers who preempt others' needs to avoid conflict. Others dissolve into the role of peacemaker, smoothing fractures at a cost to themselves. Some shapeshift, adopting whichever persona will temporarily draw warmth or approval. These strategies are not moral failures. They are learned solutions to a problem of recognition. Understanding these patterns is crucial because they offer clues into what is missing. Behind the caretaker's relentless service often lies a longing to be cared for. Behind the shapeshifter's chameleon tendencies is a wish for authenticity that never learned a safe stage. The work of becoming visible again includes disentangling from these adaptive roles, testing small acts that risk being seen, and learning that being noticed does not always result in loss. Becoming visible is not a single event. It is a set of practices. Begin with tiny, tender experiments. Say no to a small demand. State a minor preference. Allow yourself to be the first to speak your truth in a safe setting. Practice noticing your own presence. Feel the weight of your feet on the floor, the breadth of your breath, the pulse in the throat. When you speak, try a short, clear sentence and let the silence that follows be part of the test. Find witnesses. A therapist, a friend, a group where mutual reflection is practiced. Witnessing is different from judgment. It is the skill of receiving another's existence and returning it with curiosity. Over time, these micro-practices reteach the nervous system that being seen is survivable. They teach the inner voice that it is permitted to exist outside of utility. The path is gradual but cumulative, and the accumulation is what ends the exile. To close, let us examine with clarity the psychological architecture that sustains invisibility and the pathways that make visibility possible. This analysis is both clinical and humane. We will name mechanisms so they lose their power to mystify. 1. Developmental learning and attachment. From earliest relational experiences, infants and children encode patterns of responsiveness. Attachment theory teaches that consistent, sensitive caregiving fosters a secure base, a template by which the child learns to expect availability. When responsiveness is inconsistent, neglectful, or absent, an insecure attachment style can develop. One variant, dismissive or avoidant patterns, may lead a child to internalize the belief that others are unreliable or unavailable. The adult who feels invisible may carry these early templates into later relationships, unconsciously seeking the patterns they know while simultaneously longing for something different. 2. Social reinforcement and role. Entrenchment. Human behavior is strongly shaped by social contingencies. If a person is repeatedly rewarded for being small, praised for compliance, given tasks that keep them busy, assumed to be dependable without acknowledgement, the smallness becomes an adaptive identity. Over time, these roles become self-reinforcing, The world treats the person as indispensable and invisible at once. To dismantle this, one must shift contingencies, refuse automatic labor, create boundaries, and allow others to experience discomfort as they adjust to a new dynamic. 3. Neurobiology of chronic neglect. Chronic relational neglect rewires stress systems. Elevated baseline cortisol, heightened sympathetic tone, and alterations in threat detection become the physiology of invisibility. These changes make the body ready to anticipate rejection. They make novelty, being seen, feel risky. Effective healing often requires somatic approaches that work with the nervous system. Breath work, slow movement, grounding practices, and therapies such as somatic experiencing or sensor-motor psychotherapy that renegotiate bodily expectation. 4. Cognitive narratives and internal speech. The mind fills the silence with narratives. I am not important. My needs are a burden. These cognitive frames filter experience and create selective perception. The invisible person notices the neglect and minimizes the confirmations of care. Cognitive restructuring, narrative therapy, and mindfulness practices help by making the narrative visible, examinable, and therefore modifiable. Reauthoring one's life story, practicing telling alternative accounts that include evidence of worth, is small but powerful work. 5. Relational repair and interpersonal practice. Visibility is fundamentally relational. It requires not only internal work, but also relational experiments. These include asking for small things and observing outcomes, naming feelings in a conversation, and inviting feedback. When the other is incapable of repair, grieving is necessary. But when the other is capable, repair can rebuild recognition. Couple and family therapies that emphasize mutual attunement can be transformative if both parties are willing. 6. Therapeutic pathways and practical steps. Begin with safety. Grounding, regulated breathing, and predictable routine reduce bodily alarm. Small boundary practice. Start with minor refusals, a short no, and notice the world's response. Witnessing relationships. Seek therapy or groups that practice reflective listening. The experience of being mirrored safely rewires expectations. Somatic work. Engage therapies that attend to the body's memory of neglect. Movement, touch when safe, and breath can thaw chronic tension. Narrative rewriting. Keep a journal of instances of care and visibility. Read them when doubt grows. Permit grief. Part of reclaiming visibility is grieving the recognition you never received. Grief is not defeat. It clears space for new visibility. 7. The ethics of expectation. Finally, understand that not every environment will be reparative. Part of healing is learning to allocate vulnerability where repair is possible. This is an ethical judgment. Whom do we trust with our visibility? Whom do we protect from our pain? Cultivating discernment is as important as cultivating courage. Closing reflection. To feel visible is to take up the radical act of existing loudly enough to be noticed and gently enough to be humane to oneself. It is to reroute a nervous system into trust slowly and persistently. It is to learn that asking for air does not always lead to denial, that naming a need is not inherently selfish, that presence has a grammar we can learn. There is no single heroic moment of transformation. There is 1,000 small returns, a steady accumulation of being allowed to be seen. If you are listening, if some part of you has carried this quiet ache, know this: you are permitted to occupy space. The process is slow and often,